Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Hi everyone, I'm here with my friend Artur Meister. My Artur is a former coworker of mine, and now he ventured out and has his own podcast. He has a team of 3, and now I'm in their office/loft. It looks amazing, and I can't believe just about a year ago he was sitting next to me in the lunchroom, and now he's raised money and interviewing amazing guests on his podcast.
Yeah.
His
Yeah,
podcast,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for agreeing to be here. So what's your podcast about? What is it called?
Yeah. So we started a podcast called Breaking Into Startups. And some people think it's more about like starting companies, or like the name itself is pretty kind of provocative. Like what does it mean breaking into startups? But we're my co-founders and I, we came from non-traditional backgrounds. We weren't in tech. We were sitting on the sidelines reading tech news, and one day we decided to get a job in startups because we eventually wanted to start our own companies. And so we called the podcast Breaking Into Startups because after we broke in, we started sharing our story, blogging, writing articles on Medium, and people started reaching out to us asking for advice. And we were like, all right, let's actually start a podcast so we could reach thousands of people, and we called it Breaking Into Startups.
Well, this is awesome. So it was really organic because you've broken into startups.
And it kind of like just, we kept telling people, giving them advice, like this is how you break in, this is how you break in. And then we're like, well, the podcast has to be called Breaking Into Startups.
So how did you break in? What was your background?
So this actually, a lot of people think that like we broke in like not recently, like the idea of the podcast came together relatively recently because we started about 2 years ago. But actually we were in Atlanta in 2013, so almost 5 years ago, and that's where I met my co-founders Ruben, and then my other co-founder Timur, who's also my twin brother. We were all working in the corporate world, and we were trying to figure out like the next move because we realized like we got our jobs, we got our like salaries, but something was missing, and so we were thinking about starting a company. But back in 2013, we were all business guys. Like we had ideas, we had all these dreams, but none of us could execute. So in 2013, after going to a bunch of meetups, doing a hackathon, we decided to break into tech, and we decided to like divide and conquer. So Timur, who's my brother, and I, we decided to learn how to code and become engineers. So it was a pretty drastic transition going from finance, investment banking to engineering. And then my other co-founder Ruben, he decided to break into like business development, sales, and more on the business side. And so we made this plan 5 years ago. Timur and I started learning how to code, applying to coding boot camps, like just grinding like day in, day out, like coding. And then Ruben started building partnerships and like building relationships with people in tech, venture capitalists. He's amazing on Twitter. So he would get into all these conversations on Twitter with venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, connect them. And so it was actually a pretty natural like evolution because when Ruben decided to move out here first, he already had probably a network of 20 people who welcomed him and let him stay at their house. And then once he built the base, Timur and I followed a few months later, and we just went straight into coding boot camps. And kind of the rest kind of fell into place.
This is awesome. So you started really far in advance.
Yeah.
And then there was like a vision for you to get where you are now.
Yeah, and we love playing chess, so we always like to think like
strategy.
5-10 moves ahead.
Nice.
And even though it might seem like, oh, like the Breaking Startups podcast, they have so many listeners, stuff like that plan and like that work went in 5 years ago. We started putting in the work, and then once we launched the podcast, we already were connected with all the top bootcamp founders. We were helping a lot of people break into tech. So on the day of the launch, we already had like 1,000 people that we could turn to and said, please share this with all your friends, organizations that loved what we were doing, and like it kind of happened from there.
Wow. So can you describe what was your first podcast, and how did you prepare the audience already? Because you said you already started with 1,000.
Yeah. So that's an interesting, like going back to the first podcast, I feel like it's been such a long time ago, but our first guest was Aubrey Brown. And his story is really cool because he was a college dropout. He learned how to code on his own. from Oakland originally, and then he went to a coding bootcamp as well. And then after that, he started his own coding bootcamp to help people from underrepresented backgrounds to break into tech, called Telegraph Academy. And so he was running that bootcamp, helping like dozens of people acquire the skills for technology, for software. And yeah, he was the first great guest because he had like a background that was pretty, like he overcame a lot of challenges, and at the same time he was giving back and kind of opening doors for other people. And so Aubrey was our first guest. And what we did with our podcast is initially we wanted to release daily, which is actually like a pretty lofty goal, but we thought, yeah, we could just do like, let's just create a backlog of like 20, 30 episodes, and then we could just drop one daily. And after we started recording, I think after episode 20, we realized how hard it is to not just record, interview the guests, but also everything that goes behind the scenes, like editing, like transcribing, publishing, and we just realized that that's a lot of work. And so instead of doing daily, we started doing weekly. And so since we already had a backlog of 20 episodes, that kind of gave us buffer room to make sure we keep our quality up, while at the same time also like finding amazing guests and taking it from there.
Nice. So you said that you already had sort of an audience to begin with. And so what was it like, and how did you even get them to be prescribed or subscribe to that?
Yeah.
And then how did you move into even more developing?
Totally. Yeah, and when I say we had an audience, it wasn't like we had a huge audience. I think it was just maybe 50 to 100 people who were familiar with us. We had phone calls with them, we had coffee meetings, we were kind of adding value to them. And a lot of it just came from sharing our story on Medium and on Twitter, and folks would just like go on Google and type in like get a job in tech, or how do I get into a coding bootcamp, and then our content would pop up on the first page. And so people just naturally reached out to us. We took every single coffee meeting, phone call, and then when we were ready to launch, they supported us. And so I'm kind of big into tactical advice as well. And so I think one thing that I always kind of found frustrating with listening to interviews like this is that a lot of the founders or like podcasters who already had a little bit of success, it was kind of like hard to replicate what they did. So I'm big on tactical advice as well. So we used a tool called Thunderclap. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So Thunderclap, basically you create this campaign and you get, it's kind of like a Kickstarter for like podcast launches.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so instead of contributing money, people contribute either a tweet or a Facebook post. And so we hit up everyone on our mailing list and said, hey, we're launching this podcast. Would you be down to contribute like your tweet or your Facebook message? And so we got, I think, almost 100 people to agree. And I think Ruben has a really wide network, so he got the one of the singers from Pentatonics to agree, and he has like millions of followers, and then a couple other VCs. And so, I mean, it only takes like 10, 20 people who have a decent following to agree, and then you have, I think our collective reach was something like 2 million if you add up all the followers on Twitter. But that gave us a huge boost because on day one when we launched, the tool Thunderclap just sends out a message like a pre-configured tweet to everyone's feed. So then on day one when we launched, we just got like tons of traffic. People started sharing, engagement, and it was pretty awesome because like we just saw like, hey, like there's so much support and so much love, and it all happened together at the same time. So it kind of like gave it a nice boost.
That's awesome. So what's your following right now?
I mean, we try to be everywhere. So we're on YouTube, on Instagram, Facebook, and we've been kind of growth hacking and trying to work hard at developing a loyal follower base. So with our podcast, we've reached over 3 million people on social media. And then in terms of followers, we have, I don't know, like thousands of followers on each of the platforms. Just at this point, it's a little bit too hard to keep track of everyone's account. But we're big on trying to repurpose content for every platform. And like YouTube is more long form, horizontal, right? Landscape mode. with Instagram, it's more short form content, like 15 seconds, 60 seconds. We're big on Instagram stories, so it's portrait mode, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, we just try to be on every platform, engage with people, comment on their posts, like their posts, and then you get a lot of that back in return.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you're not just promoting yours, but you're also engaging with others.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people will make a post on Facebook or Instagram, and then they get like a few comments, and then they're just like, how come someone else is getting like hundreds of comments and I'm only getting like 5 or 3, right? And the secret is just you have to add value to their feed. Like if you're adding value to their when they post, if you're there when you see a cool picture and you just don't just like passively like it or scroll by it, you actually take 10 seconds to leave a comment, those people will remember, and then when your post comes up, they'll return the favor, you know? So it's a lot of it just kind of you have to build over time, but people notice like when you took a time to read their post or have a genuine comment, and then they'll return that down the line, and that's how you build your following over time.
That's a really good advice for anyone, not just in tech, but anyone who wants to build an audience.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine, she actually just looks for kind of trends and what's important to the audience right now, and even through hashtags and like something that's kind of trending in a moment, she jumps on that train and then tries to add value. Yeah. What other tips would you give to someone who's starting out to build an audience or just wants to kind of reach out to people?
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistake we made initially was we wanted to reach everyone. So we didn't put in the work to define who our target audience is, because it's kind of tough when you come from a place of like you want to impact millions of people's lives and you want to add value to everyone. You kind of like don't just want to say, oh, I want to focus on this super targeted like customer or like audience. Instead, I think initially we were like, well, we should just help everyone that's in tech, everyone that's out of tech, everyone. It could be like veterans, it could be single parents, it could be consultants, bankers, teachers, and these folks could be already like in the process of getting into boot camps, or these people could be early on, like just exploring careers. They could be interested in design or engineering. So initially we were just like kind of scattered across the board, and it was very hard to make choices, like to choose one segment, because you basically have to mentally say, all right, we're gonna pass on everyone else.
Limit ourselves.
That's very hard for someone that wants to impact millions of people's lives, because you're saying, how can I pass on this segment when they need this type of content? And so that was very hard to do in the beginning, but what we found is by having a focus, we're able to make that target audience super happy with our content. And then because they loved it, they started sharing with their friends, and they felt like this content spoke to them. And then over time, we started adding more and more other like types of concentrations and things like that. But even now, we're primarily focused on people who are starting out and they're still deciding the best path to take into tech, so way earlier in the process. And we've also decided to focus on people that want to do coding, even though it's called Breaking the Startups, and we have content for design, product as well. Majority of our episodes are about coding, and we interview coding bootcamp founders, and that's something we had to pick like from a strategy point of view, because we can't make everyone happy, and we'd rather make a certain demographic ecstatic about our content versus just being like every other podcast, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. You know, I love podcasts, so I listen to Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss, and you can find pretty much any topic in their podcast. So I guess it is a little weird to choose and narrow yourself down, but you do provide a lot of value. So what was your experience, I guess, starting with more general, and then how was the reaction from the people when anyone could reach out and find small bits and pieces versus right now, maybe those people fell off and now it's more targeted?
So I think the people so we still have, I think it's not necessarily that we stopped producing content for other verticals, just we made our focus be people that want to learn how to code. And so we still have interviews with people that broke into design, broke into product management, sales. Like we still have enough offering for them. But most of our focus in the last 6 months has been towards helping people navigate the bootcamp space, how to prepare for boot camps, how to level up in a junior engineering role. So we're trying to just provide tons of value around this vertical and really become the dominant force to be like the best podcast for people that want to become engineers. And then once we prove ourselves there, since our name, Bringing the Startups, is still pretty general, then we could say,
Yes.
all right, after this, we're going to go after, like, in addition to software engineering, we'll do design maybe, or some other vertical. And then one by one, we'll kind of establish our presence in other verticals versus trying to be everywhere at once. And then what happens is our listeners, and that's some of the feedback we've got from listeners as well, is let's say you're interested in coding, right? So since we release a podcast weekly, that means that you may not hear another software engineering episode for another 2 or 3 weeks.
Correct.
If we release design, sales, product management, and so a lot of our listeners are saying, "Hey, I really love your podcast, but I feel like I'm only getting true value like once a month."
Yeah.
And we wanted to increase that frequency to like every month, make it into a routine, a habit. That's something that people just do on the way to work or at the gym, and so that's kind of what we decided to do.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So who were some of the influential guests on your
Yeah.
podcast, and maybe someone who really helped you along the way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've had a pretty wide variety. I think the reason for the podcast kind of elevates stories of people who are already in tech, and so there's a girl we just interviewed this past week. Her name is Madeline. She works at Pinterest. She started there as an apprentice, and her story is just mind blowing because she grew up in Washington Heights, single parent household. She mentioned that like in her neighborhood, the only way to become anyone is to become either a celebrity or like a baseball player. And that she was saying that when she was growing up, like she didn't even plan on going to college until she took pre-SATs, and she scored really well, and her teachers were like, yeah, like you should definitely consider going to college. And she ended up getting a 4-year degree, but even while she was getting that degree, she didn't really know what she wanted to do. She was getting into student debt because it's expensive to get a 4-year degree in the United States. And then she just like, I think she mentioned that she was traveling in Turkey, and she met 2 girls who were computer science majors, and until then she didn't know what computer science meant. She didn't know what coding even meant.
That's amazing.
And then she saw these 2 like attractive girls, and she was like, wait, they're cool and they're good looking and they're also like engineers. Like I could be that too. So once she kind of saw that connection, she started taking coding classes online. She did a 12-month coding boot camp and then got an apprenticeship at Pinterest. And she's been at Pinterest for over 2 years. She's has her own like Latin Women in Tech group that she organizes, and she's been featured on Univision and other national campaigns. And she's just inspiring more women from like Latin background to break into tech. And her story is just like one of 100 stories on our podcast. And a lot of the time you work with people that you don't even know like really like the hardships they had to overcome or challenges.
Yeah.
And the goal for the podcast is just to elevate those voices and show that, hey, like there's like these super humans among us and we don't even know, like we might just think they're a regular coworker, but they all have amazing stories of how they broke in. And so yeah, that's these are the type of stories that we're like that drives the Breaking Stars podcast. And that was the primary reason for starting it.
Yeah, it actually really resonates with me because in those podcasts that I mentioned, we hear a lot of celebrities and someone who's already super successful.
Yeah.
And they've come a long way, and but it's just really hard to relate to their story because they're already so far ahead.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also interview people who are kind of starting out or just
totally.
have something significant to share, and then you can definitely relate. Like you've been working together in the same office, and look at you now.
I mean, I'm only starting out too, and like it feels like I'm still in day one of my journey as well. Every day feels like this, like the first day when we launched. So we have this huge goal of helping 1 billion people in our lifetimes, like get jobs in tech and other industries and just level up and find fulfilling careers. And so in order to reach that vision, we need to be working even harder every day. So we're just starting out, like just getting our gears up, and I'm excited for like the next 5-10 years of like what we'll be able to build with our team. In terms of your point on like celebrities and like people, a lot of podcasts or a lot of media in general idolizes celebrities, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to start our podcast and our own independent platform where we could elevate voices, because tech media like focuses on Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, a lot of the co-founders and CEOs who already have tons of publicity.
Exactly.
And those stories, even though they're like inspirational, they don't really provide a lot of they don't really have a strong call to action for regular folks, because how do you compare yourself to Elon Musk when he seems like unobtainable, and a lot of folks who are listening to the either podcast or reading a news story about him, there's no action steps for them to take to get to their level. And so with our podcast, we intentionally decide not to interview entrepreneurs or like famous people who are just like easy to get like views and clicks, but like there's no action behind it. And so with our podcast, whenever we interview someone, we actually break down their story into a roadmap that's someone else who's listening could follow. So we've interviewed veterans, and we're like, all right, so what did you do after you finished the army? Like, what courses did you take? How did you approach the job search? What are the tips for like succeeding in the job search? So our content is super actions oriented, because we want people to actually like use that 30 minutes to impact the next like 6 months of their life.
I love it. Not just get inspired, which is great, but also actually have a plan and have an idea of what they can do right after.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I have a quick question about how you said you had obviously your co-founders.
Yeah.
So would you say that it was definitely a plus to be like in the same boat with other people? Because a lot of, like even mine right now, I'm just doing it by myself, and it's for myself. But it's
Totally.
Also great that you have a team.
Yeah. So I personally, I can't even imagine doing this alone. Because it's so tough, like being an entrepreneur or starting something new from scratch is difficult, and there's so many things you have to be good at as a company or as a team. And so when we were bringing the startups, there's even like just to break down some of the roles that you would, like some of the areas you need to be really good at. You need to be able to like record the podcast, right? So someone needs to understand sound and editing and video. Then you need someone who could actually really good at editing, which is a completely different area of expertise, because you have to work with other people, explain to them what you want, how you want it edited, things like that. Then you have to be good at marketing, because just because you have a great podcast or a great story, how are you going to reach those folks, right? So you need to have a content team. You need to have writers. You need to have a social media presence. So you have to know how to work on all these platforms. You may need to have something like tech related, right? You need to have a website or some way to nail down the distribution. You need someone who's good at finances, right? And so there's so many areas that your team needs to be good at, that if you're a solo founder, a lot of the time it could feel overwhelming, especially if you're doing this as a side project. And it could be a little bit discouraging sometimes when you're like, you've worked so hard and then you publish and then your video may not get as many likes or views as you expected. And so by having a team around you who are in it together, you kind of keep yourself motivated, accountable. Like there's been plenty of times where like I'm not, there might be days when I'm not like super into it, and Timo and Ruben kind of lift me up and make sure I make the meeting. And there's other days when we're like, hey, like we need to make sure we're better at here and in this area. And so we have like very open conversations every week where we discuss how we can improve the process.
You do retros?
We do retros. And it's been a like wild journey. Every week we try to improve at least one thing about our process, and it's shown real results. So I can't even imagine doing anything entrepreneurial without having a co-founder.
That makes a lot of sense actually. But something you mentioned there as well is you need to be good at finance. So I imagine now you're making money out of this. But how did you transition from that just being a side project and then to actually making money?
Yeah, totally. So I think for a lot of like I think the main motivation for starting these projects, especially since they're so hard to pull off, it can really be money, but you should definitely think about what how you could monetize in the future. So in our case, we knew that if we could build an audience, if we could get people super passionate about tech, we'll find ways to monetize it down the line. And so that's been kind of like the our approach. There's a lot of podcasters that get sponsors right away, or like they try to get they spend a lot of their time hitting up companies to try to get podcast sponsorship, and that's a decent way to make money, but you're basically kind of liable to your sponsors for revenue, so you have to kind of like they're your customer, and we wanted to make our customers our audience, and so instead of looking for podcast sponsorships, we focused our attention on building out our audience and then finding ways along the way that we could monetize and help pay the bills and reinvest back into producing higher quality content. And so for us, it's always been audience first. We never want to charge our audience either. So there's some podcasters that have communities and memberships things. We didn't really want to go that route because we want to be able to provide access to anyone. And usually when you charge someone $10 a month, even though it's not a lot of money, it will discourage people from joining. And so for us, a lot of the revenue streams have been from organizing events or partnering with different boot camps or training programs where we could provide them with great students that we already know like will succeed. And so that's been our main like way to monetize and reinvest that money back into the community.
That's awesome, and I heard that you just closed your pre-fund.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been even announced yet. So, but I think by the time this episode comes out, it'll be announced.
That's awesome. So, how did you get that?
Yeah, so we just raised a pre-seed round for a new company we launched called Career Karma. So the Breaking the Startups podcast is a media company. We're running it like it's doing really well. But what we realized along the way is that there's a lot of folks who get interested from listening to an episode or hearing someone's story, but they don't have a clear action plan or clear roadmap to follow after they get excited. And it's super important to capture someone in the first hour, in the first day when someone makes that decision, I want to break into tech, because most likely if they do it in isolation, they might sign up for a course, spend an hour doing that course, and then kind of give up and stop doing it because it's tough to be able to do it alone. And so we decided to build Career Karma as a tech platform to support people that want to break into tech. And it's complementary to Bringing the Startups because it's a peer learning platform that helps people discover other folks in the same stage as them. So with specific career goals, it could be getting a job as a software engineer, it could be attending a boot camp, it could be leveling up in your first job. And so we have a large community now of people who are breaking into tech. And so they're put into these peer circles of 5 to 10 people who share the same objectives as them. And so they're able to learn from each other, and they're able to keep each other accountable, almost like recreating that like accountability group that Timo, Ruben, and I had when we were breaking into tech. Just someone that will, if you're slacking off, someone will call you out, or if someone else is having challenging time with something, you could say, hey, like I actually had the same problem before, this is how you solve it, because this journey into tech, it's tough, it takes 6 to 12 months, and you can't do it alone. So this new company, Career Karma, is going to help facilitate that, and our goal is to kind of productize everything that goes into a career transitioning. And so, like when people make referrals to companies or when people have coffee meetings, we want to capture that and help people come together and like facilitate and work together easier. So yeah, that's kind of the big idea behind Career Karma. In terms of, I think your question was about capital raising.
Yeah.
So Ruben is actually someone that was running with the capital raising on the capital raising side, and like for the last 5 years, literally one of his jobs or one of his roles was to network, get to know venture capitalists, be on panels, like add value, introduce companies to these venture capitalists to show that he has a good understanding of the space. And so he's built very strong relationships with a lot of VCs. And when it was time for us to raise capital, it wasn't even like we were pitching them. It was more about, hey, like, wanted to share what I'm working on. Are you interested in potentially being one of our first investors? Because we really like believe in your approach, like your value that you've added to other entrepreneurs. So we kind of got lucky in that respect, but I don't believe in luck. So it's more like in the last 5 years, Ruben just did an amazing job grounding himself in this like ecosystem, and so it just was more of a natural like evolution of us being in tech.
Yeah, luck is like a preparation that meets talent or something like that.
Totally. I mean, we closed around in like less than a month, and it never felt like we were like kind of like Shark Tank atmosphere where you're going in front of someone who doesn't know who you are, doesn't know about your track record, and you're just trying to like make a good impression, and they're trying to just evaluate who you are based on a few signals. Since we've known most of our investors for the last like year or two, they've seen what we could do with breaking the startups, and they believe in what we could do with Career Karma.
This is so awesome. It's such an inspirational story. I wish we could have more time because I have a billion more questions, but I want to be mindful of the time.
For sure.
Thank you so much for sharing everything. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I wish you best of luck with your podcast and your video series.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see where you end up.
Yeah, and I'll share all of the contact details for anyone who's interested in get in touch. I know already a few people who will definitely benefit.
And it's super easy to find me. It's Artur at Breaking into Startups. So if you have any questions about breaking into tech, getting a job in tech, or if you know friends who might be interested, just hit me up. I'm Artur at Breaking into Startups. I'm also on Twitter, social media, and you can just find me by Googling my name.
Awesome. I'll include all of the links.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again.
Thanks.